Mom, why? I was sitting there in that cold, echoing courtroom, my fingers laced so tightly together in my lap, they'd turned bone white, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my throat. Across the aisle, Jason Walker stood up with the same easy confidence he used to reserve for job interviews, as if this was just another performance. He smoothed his new gray tie, the one I'm sure he bought just for today, like appearances could erase the years of damage he'd caused. He didn't spare me even a glance. His gaze locked straight onto Judge Harold Benson. Your Honor, Jason began, his tone dripping with carefully rehearsed sincerity. She's unfit to raise our daughter. Even her own family has abandoned her. As if on cue, his lawyer, Mr. Douglas Reed, gave a solemn nod, the kind that pretends to be neutral, but reeks of smug agreement. You'd think they'd practiced this act over breakfast, perfecting every pause, every tilt of the head, just to make sure it landed like a gut punch. And it did. For a moment, I was paralyzed. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat, my stomach coiling in on itself. The weight of every stare in that room felt like hot irons pressed against my skin, branding me with words I knew weren't true. Unfit. Abandoned. Jason didn't just lie. No lies would have been kinder. He weaponized them sharp and precise, swinging them with the same detached cruelty he'd always used, calculated to inflict maximum damage without ever raising his voice. I wanted to shout. I wanted to stand up and tell the whole damn room how Jason was the one who had isolated me, how he'd spent years whispering poison into my mother's ear, convincing her that I was unstable, too emotional, too much. How he'd slowly pulled me away from every person who ever loved me until I was left in silence, convinced it was somehow my fault. But my voice betrayed me. The words wouldn't come. I glanced to my side, to Sophie, my sweet, sharp-eyed 8-year-old sitting in that oversized wooden chair, her legs swinging back and forth, not quite touching the scuffed courtroom floor. She hugged her small lavender backpack against her chest like it was her own personal shield. Her honey-brown hair was braided neatly down her back, a ritual we'd done together that very morning, her tiny hands fidgeting with the rubber strap on her pink watch, her tell whenever nerves got the best of her. And then it happened. Jason's words, twisted, polished lies, hung heavy in the air. And that's when Sophie turned to me. She didn't look frightened. No, there was something else in her gaze. Steadiness, resolve, the kind of quiet courage most adults only dream of having. Before I could react, before anyone could stop her, Sophie stood up. In that hush of the courtroom, she rose with a quiet dignity, as if she'd always belonged there, as if her voice had as much right to be heard as any suited man's. With both hands, she unzipped her lavender backpack and pulled out her unicorn-covered journal, the one I'd assumed was filled with innocent doodles and math problems. My heart skipped. This wasn't planned. Your Honor, Sophie said, her voice small but clear as a bell, I'd like to read something from my notebook, please. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even the ancient clock on the wall above Judge Benson seemed to pause its ticking louder than ever. The judge, eyebrows raised, leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his tired eyes. Go ahead, sweetheart, he said gently. Sophie didn't flinch. She looked right at Jason, then her eyes softened as they met mine. Slowly, she opened the little book, flipping through pages until she found the one she wanted. And then, with the same calm clarity, she began to read. She spoke of nights when Jason slammed the kitchen cabinets so hard the dishes rattled, his anger barely contained. She told them about the time he kicked our golden retriever Daisy so viciously she limped for 3 days, how she'd been told not to tell me. Sophie described in painstaking detail the whispered threats, the cruel names he'd spat when he thought no one was listening. Every word was a truth I had carried alone for so long, now spilling into the open through my daughter's steady voice. There was no trembling, no hesitation. Just the truth laid bare. When Sophie finally closed her journal, the silence in that courtroom was deafening. Even Judge Benson looked shaken, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied my daughter. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not when Jason spun his lies, not when his lawyer nodded like a metronome, but when an 8-year-old girl stood up, faced a room full of adults, and spoke the truth no one else dared to say. People always think leaving is the hardest part. That walking out, packing your bags, taking that first step, that's the battle. But it's not. The hardest part is what comes after. The suffocating silence. The relentless guilt. the constant second guessing that no one warns you about. When I left Jason, I had nothing. No savings, no job, no friends left to call. I grabbed 2 duffel bags and bundled Sophie into the car in the dead of night. She was still in her polka dot pajamas, clutching her stuffed giraffe. I didn't even pause to grab her favorite blanket. I just knew we had to leave. I told her we were going on a special adventure. She smiled, she believed me. Bless her heart, she believed me. We ended up in a modest, drafty apartment complex on the outskirts of Greensboro, not far from the highway. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, the carpet stained and threadbare. The heater made a terrible clanking noise every time it sputtered to life. But it was ours. It was safe. No yelling, no broken glass, no slamming doors rattling the windows. I was 35 years old, starting over with an 8-year-old daughter and 2 mismatched laundry baskets of clothes. That first week was brutal. Sophie asked every night when we'd be going back home. She missed her room, her toys, even Daisy. And yes, she missed her father because children don't see manipulation. They don't see emotional abuse. They see the parent who once read them bedtime stories. I tried to give her normalcy where I could. I borrowed a dented pot from the downstairs neighbor and made spaghetti. I stuck her school drawings on the fridge with cheap dollar store magnets. Every night I tucked her in with a flashlight under the covers because the new shadows in that unfamiliar ceiling frightened her. I'd go to bed each night convinced I had failed her. But every morning I got up and smiled because I had to. That's what mothers do. On the outside, no one understood. People rarely do. When Jason called my mother Maggie Monroe to tell her I had lost it, she believed him. He painted a vivid picture me, unstable, paranoid, dragging Sophie through unnecessary chaos. And because I had cried to her so many times before, only to go back to him this time, she didn't believe me. She stopped calling, stopped answering. It felt like I had lost her too. Jason's true skill was never his anger. It was how he could make me look like the crazy one. There were days I even questioned myself. Walking Sophie to school, I'd wonder, was I the problem? Had I overreacted? Maybe Sophie needed her father after all. But then I'd see it. The way her small body would tense the moment Jason's old Chevy rumbled into the driveway. The way her shoulders flinched when a voice rose too quickly. I remembered the day she sat coloring quietly and said, "I like when Daddy goes away for work. The house feels softer." Softer, that was the word she used. In the quiet moments, I started seeking help. Quietly. Cheap, patchy therapy sessions. I couldn't afford much, but it was something. And I began to document. Every text, every ignored pickup, every untouched lunchbox. My lawyer told me I needed to build a case. But deep down, I wasn't building a case, I was building a shield. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that what I had lived was real. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself had absorbed the weight of what lay ahead. I dropped Sophie off at school, her small hand slipping from mine with a cheerful wave that belied the storm inside me. As soon as the car door clicked shut, I found myself frozen in the parking lot, staring blankly through the windshield as the minutes dragged past. 30 minutes. Maybe more. Long enough for the windows to fog for my lungs to remember how to breathe in shallow, unsteady increments. It wasn't just about leaving Jason Walker, though God knows that had been a battle in itself. No. The real war had been surviving the aftermath, clawing my way out of the wreckage, with enough of myself intact to keep Sophie from crumbling. Every smile forced through clenched teeth, every bedtime story read, with a voice steadying through exhaustion, had been a small rebellion against the woman he wanted me to become. A ghost, a shadow of a mother. When the school bell rang that afternoon, Sophie climbed into the passenger seat with a paper clutched in her hands. She beamed as she presented her latest masterpiece, 2 stick figures lopsided, but unmistakably us, standing beneath a sprawling tree whose roots tangled off the page. "That's us, Mommy," she said as if it were obvious, holding hands under the big tree. "That's where we're going when it's all done. Somewhere with trees, and no shouting." I smiled, a reflex born of habit, and murmured, "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." But beneath the practiced curve of my lips, terror pooled. Tomorrow I would stand in a courtroom and plead with strangers to believe I wasn't broken, to see past Jason's polished lies. And even though I had rehearsed every argument in my head, I knew exactly how it would unfold. Jason would flash his charming grin, wrap his deception in concern, and convince them, as he'd convinced so many before, that he was the hero of this story. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Sophie had been paying attention all along. That while I was busy shielding her from the wreckage, she had been quietly documenting every shard of glass he'd left behind, and she was about to show the world that sometimes truth finds its voice in the smallest among us. The courthouse reeked of bleach and nerves, the sterile scent clashing with the tang of anxious sweat that seemed embedded in its very walls. Sophie sat beside me on a cold wooden bench, her legs too short to reach the floor, swinging back and forth in a rhythmic pendulum that soothed her more than it did me. She hummed softly to herself, bent over a coloring book I had slipped into her backpack, the same one that accompanied her to every doctor's visit. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with my phone, checking the time every few minutes, though I already knew it by heart. The minutes crawled thick with anticipation. And when they finally called our names, I rose so abruptly the world tilted, my balance teetering on the edge. A small, firm hand slid into mine, Sophie's grounding me with a squeeze that seemed impossibly strong for fingers so small. "We've got this, Mommy," she whispered. Simple, certain. I squeezed back, wondering if I believed it half as much as she did. Inside the courtroom felt like a stage each of us cast in roles we hadn't auditioned for. Jason sat across the room, draped in a navy suit. I didn't recognize his posture, relaxed, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, as if this were nothing more than a mundane meeting. Beside him, Mr. Douglas Reed, ever the picture of polished litigation, arranged his papers with a precision that spoke of hours of rehearsal. Neither man spared me a glance. My attorney leaned in, voice a murmur of caution. "Stay composed. They're going to poke until you bleed." Of course they would. Jason had always been a master of appearances, a maestro conducting his orchestra of lies with the perfect balance of charm and calculated cruelty. His words would coat his malice in the guise of concern, his abuse rebranded as fatherly devotion. They began with him, naturally. Jason recounted every carefully selected anecdote, framing my struggles as failures. He spoke of my therapy appointments as if seeking help were a scarlet letter. He mentioned, with just the right note of disappointment, the parent-teacher conference I had missed, conveniently omitting the 2 jobs I juggled, and the car that had betrayed me that day. He painted a portrait of himself as the pillar of stability, the father with the manicured lawn, the golden retriever, the steady paycheck, a Norman Rockwell illusion designed to dazzle the court. And then came the blow I had been bracing for. "Her own family won't speak to her," he said, his tone as level as ever. "Even her mother cut ties. That should tell you everything, Your Honor. She's unfit." Beside him, Reed nodded, the gesture so mechanical it could have been a reflex. Their performance was seamless, rehearsed to perfection. And as their words settled into the room, I felt the familiar burn rise in my chest. My hands gripped the armrests, white-knuckled, as the urge to scream, to claw through their lies, roared within me. But my voice remained trapped, buried beneath years of silenced truths. A glance at Sophie anchored me. She sat still, her lavender backpack resting in her lap, the zipper just slightly open. My attorney requested a recess, a mercy I hadn't known I needed until I was back in the hallway, trying to remember how to breathe. I knelt before Sophie, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "You holding up okay, bug?" She nodded, ever the stoic. "Are you?" "I'm trying," I admitted, my smile faltering, "but it's hard." Her eyes, wide and thoughtful, studied me for a long moment. Then, without fanfare, she reached into her backpack and retrieved her unicorn journal, a familiar, battered thing I'd always assumed was filled with childish scrawls. "I wrote stuff," she said, as if informing me of a grocery list, in case they didn't believe you. I blinked, the air thickening around us. "What kind of stuff?" "Things I remember, about Daddy, from when he gets mad." The weight of her words settled over me like a quilt stitched with every failure I had tried to keep from her. I had convinced myself I was protecting her, building walls against the worst of him, but Sophie had seen it all, quietly, unflinchingly. When the hearing resumed, the judge asked if I wished to respond to Jason's claims. I opened my mouth, but my words tangled in the knot that had lodged itself in my throat. And then Sophie stood. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't hesitate. She simply rose, her small figure radiating a calm defiance as she addressed Judge Benson. "Your Honor, I have something I want to read." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom, but the judge, to his credit, merely nodded. "Go ahead, Sophie." She opened her journal with deliberate care, the pages crackling as she found her place. Her hands gripping the worn cover like a shield were steady. "This part's from October," she began, her voice soft but unwavering. "That's when Daddy said I was getting too close to Mommy. He told me I should always pick him, but I didn't want to pick. I wanted both." A hush fell over the room, thick and palpable. She turned another page. "This is from Mommy's birthday. Daddy made me throw away the drawings I made for her. He said she didn't deserve anything nice, that she'd probably forget my birthday anyway, but she never has." I sat frozen, torn between pride and heartbreak. I had spent so long trying to shield her from the shards of our life, but she had gathered them all quietly, cataloging every jagged edge. She continued, her voice a melody of painful truths, each word slicing through the courtroom's facade. Every page she turned was a revelation, every sentence a mirror, reflecting the reality I had feared no one would see. And in that moment, Sophie Monroe, with her unicorn journal and steadfast heart, became the voice I had lost. The truth I had carried alone was no longer mine to bear. Sophie Walker. My daughter's voice rang through the courtroom, gentle yet unwavering, a ripple against the suffocating stillness. She turned another page of her unicorn-covered journal, the crinkling paper loud in the hush. "One time, Daddy got really mad when I spilled juice on the couch. He made me sit in the dark closet for a long, long time. He told me not to tell Mommy. I was scared, but I didn't cry. He said crying was for weak people." The words were simple, unadorned, but their weight was crushing. I felt it in the sharp intake of breath from the gallery, in the way Douglas Reed shifted uncomfortably in his chair, crossing his legs as though he could cross out the truth my daughter was etching into the record. Across from me, Jason folded his arms, his jaw tight, his composure beginning to crack like thin ice. Judge Harold Benson lifted a hand, a subtle but firm gesture that silenced the stirring courtroom. His face remained stoic, but his eyes, they softened. "Let her finish," he instructed, voice low but resolute. Sophie, small and solemn, flipped to the final page with a care that belied her age. "This is the most important one," she said, looking up, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed steady and unblinking on the judge. "Last month, Daddy said Mommy only left because she's crazy, but I saw Mommy cry in the bathroom when she thought I was asleep." Her voice faltered for a heartbeat, then gathered itself, growing stronger with each syllable. "I don't think that's crazy. I think that's brave. Because even after she cried, she made my lunch, she helped me with my math homework, and she never yelled. Not even when she was tired." Silence wrapped around us, thick and unyielding, until Sophie pierced it once more. "I feel safe with Mommy," she said, "and I want to stay with her." The words struck something primal in me. My hand flew to my chest, clutching at the tight ache I hadn't even realized was there. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, but I willed them back, determined to watch my daughter, my warrior, stand her ground amidst a room of adults who had so often failed her. Judge Benson leaned forward, folding his hands on the bench. "Sophie," he said gently, "did anyone tell you to write this? Did anyone ask you to read it today?" She shook her head, her braids swaying. "No, I just wanted someone to know, just in case." A long pause followed. The judge regarded her with a depth that words could never capture. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he said, "Thank you, Sophie. You may take your seat." Sophie returned to my side, her steps measured, her journal held close like a badge of honor. As she slipped back into her chair, she leaned into me, her small frame pressing against my side. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, though I wasn't sure who was comforting whom. From across the aisle, Reed cleared his throat, a thin veneer of professionalism barely masking his discomfort. "Your Honor, with respect, while this testimony is emotionally compelling, it lacks the objectivity required." Judge Benson's gaze snapped to him, a steel edge slicing through his tone. "Mr. Reed, in my 24 years on this bench, I've heard every manner of excuse, every carefully crafted narrative, every parent who weaponizes perception to paint the other as unfit. What I heard today wasn't a tactic. It was a child, your client's child, telling the court her lived truth, and I will take it seriously." Jason's composure splintered further. He leaned into his attorney, his whispers sharp, venomous, but futile. The air had shifted irrevocably, and there was no spin smooth enough to untangle what Sophie had laid bare. I hadn't prepared her for this. God, I had tried to protect her, to shield her from the ugliness of this battle. But as I watched her speak, I understood something vital. Sophie didn't need shielding. She needed to be heard. And by giving her that moment, she had revealed the truth of who we both were. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for her right to grow up unafraid, to be seen to be safe. For a heartbeat, the courtroom held its breath. Judge Benson exhaled slowly, adjusting his glasses as he gathered his thoughts. His pen, which had scribbled furiously minutes before, now lay forgotten beside his notes. His gaze landed on me. "Ms. Monroe," he said, the weight of the moment thick in his voice. "Do you have anything you'd like to say before I make a ruling?" I stood, my legs trembling beneath me, but my voice when it came was steady, resonant with a truth no longer shackled by fear. "I didn't know she was going to do that," I said softly, gesturing towards Sophie. "I didn't ask her to write anything. I didn't even know she kept a journal. All I ever wanted was to protect her from this, from him. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep the truth from her." I turned to look at Sophie. She sat poised, flipping through the edge of her journal as if she had merely presented a school report. The innocence of the gesture struck me like a hammer to the heart. "She's not just my daughter." I continued, my throat tight, but clear. "She's the reason I kept going when every part of me wanted to give up. She watched me survive something that should have broken me. And she's still standing tall after everything." A flicker of something respect perhaps passed over Judge Benson's face. He shifted his attention to Jason. "Mr. Walker, do you have a response?" Jason rose, his smile tight, his posture rigid. His eyes darted from me to Sophie, then back to the judge. I recognized that look, the desperate scramble for control slipping through his fingers. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is getting overly emotional. Children don't always understand the complexities of adult relationships." He gestured vaguely towards Sophie, his voice laced with patronization. "Samantha is just a child. I'm sure her mother helped shape that narrative." Sophie, my daughter, corrected her tone, calm but cutting, slicing through his dismissal with surgical precision. "My name is Sophie." Judge Benson raised a hand once more. "That will be enough, Mr. Walker." Jason's jaw flexed, but the fight had drained from his stance. The judge inhaled deeply, scanning his notes, though it was clear his decision had been made long before. "I've reviewed the documents. I've heard every argument. But today I listened to something far more compelling than legal statements. A child's testimony given with detail and conviction, uncoached and untainted. That carries weight in this courtroom." He turned to his clerk. "I am awarding temporary full custody to Ms. Monroe, effective immediately. Mr. Walker, any visitation will be supervised until a full psychological evaluation and home review are completed." Relief didn't come in a flood. It came like a door slowly creaking open, releasing a pressure I hadn't realized was crushing me from the inside out. My knees threatened to buckle, but Sophie's hand found mine, anchoring me once more. "Does that mean we can go home now?" she asked, her voice laced with tentative hope. I nodded, blinking back the sting of tears. "Yes, baby, we can." As I gathered our things, I caught sight of Jason, his face a storm of rage and denial, his whispers to Reed laced with venom. But his words no longer had hooks. They couldn't reach me anymore. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in golden light. Sophie and I descended slowly, savoring the air each step away from that courtroom, feeling like a step back to ourselves. At the bottom, a voice tentative, lined with guilt, called out, "Sarah." I turned. There stood my mother, Margaret Monroe, older than I remembered, her features carved with remorse. She approached cautiously, each step heavy with years of absence. "I was here today. I sat in the back. I didn't know Sarah. I didn't want to believe it, but I do now. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." Part of me wanted to recoil, to remind her of the silence she'd given me when I had begged for her ear. But Sophie, in her infinite grace, did what I couldn't. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist. I let that be the answer for now. That night, home was a sanctuary. I tucked Sophie into bed, watching as she curled beneath her blanket, clutching her journal to her chest, as though it were her favorite stuffed toy. "You were brave today," I whispered. Her eyes, sleepy yet luminous, met mine. "You were brave first." The lights dimmed. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like a threat. It felt safe. It felt earned. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, a golden promise of something softer. Sophie lay on her side, her journal resting on the nightstand, her breath slow and even. For a long moment, I simply sat beside her, watching her sleep, grateful beyond measure that the story wasn't ending in that courtroom. It was just beginning. There was something about that morning, a delicate, almost sacred stillness, that made the chaos of the past months feel like a distant storm, not gone entirely, but passing at last. As I sat beside Sophie watching the rise and fall of her breath beneath soft flannel sheets, the house seemed to exhale with us. No court dates loomed on the calendar. No waking with a knot in my stomach bracing for the next version of myself Jason Walker would parade before the world. For once the silence wasn't menacing. It was peace. The court had ordered a formal investigation into his behavior. For now, I had full custody. For now, Sophie was safe. And that was all that mattered. When her eyes fluttered open, hazel and still heavy with sleep, she blinked up at me, her voice a fragile murmur. "Is today a normal day, Mommy?" I smiled then, a real one, soft and unforced. "Yes, baby, today is a normal day." We made pancakes, the kitchen filling with the warm, buttery smell of normalcy. We twirled around to the crackle of an oldies radio station, her laughter spinning through the air like sunlight. Later at the store, I let her pick out a new backpack, her choice, her freedom. She returned with dinosaur stickers and tiny glittering stars declaring with absolute certainty, "It feels brave." That week, we found ourselves at the park, beneath a sky so blue it seemed to mock the heaviness we'd carried for so long. Sophie ran across the grass, her mismatched socks peeking out as she stretched her arms like wings, laughing not politely, not carefully, but from somewhere deep and unguarded. A laugh that was hers alone. I sat on a worn wooden bench, the late afternoon sun turning her hair to gold as she squinted and smiled. And there, in that simple, perfect moment, something inside me finally uncoiled. It wasn't just relief or pride. It was deeper, stronger, a quiet, profound peace. That afternoon, my mother, Margaret Monroe, called. Her voice carried the weight of unspoken regrets, stripped of the usual defenses. She didn't attempt excuses. She didn't fumble for explanations. "I want to rebuild," she said. "If you'll let me. I want to start showing up the way I should have before." The old reflex rose in me, the instinct to shut her out, to protect the fragile walls I'd rebuilt. But another part of me, the part Sophie had fortified, whispered for grace. "I'm not ready to forget." I told her, the words tasting of bittersweet honesty. "But I'm open to forgiving." "That's enough," she said quietly. "I'll wait." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. People often ask me now what was the moment, the breaking point, the final straw that made me leave Jason. They imagine it was a dramatic outburst, some violent crescendo of cruelty. But the truth is far simpler, far sadder. It wasn't the shouting or the slamming doors, or even the bruising silences. It was the day I saw Sophie sitting in the hallway, her small hands clamped over her ears, her tiny body shrinking into itself. And I realized with a clarity that cut straight through my denial that the light behind her eyes was dimming. If I didn't leave, she would grow up believing that fear was normal, that silence was safety, that love was something you had to tiptoe around, careful not to breathe too loudly. So I left, not because I was brave, but because I couldn't bear to watch her become someone she was never meant to be. And in the end, it was Sophie who gave me the strength I thought I lacked. She stood in that courtroom, her unicorn journal clutched in determined hands, and told the truth no one else would. She didn't speak from anger. She didn't do it to wound. She did it because she believed with a child's beautiful certainty that truth mattered. And that belief, pure, unsullied by adult politics, changed everything. Adults are quick to underestimate children, to assume their innocence blinds them to tension, to manipulation, to pain. But Sophie had seen it all. She had known even when I tried to hide it. And still, she loved me. She loved me through the worst of it. That's the part I carry with me now. I'm not broken. I'm not unfit. I am a mother who fought back. A woman who rebuilt from rubble with the quiet, unwavering help of an 8-year-old girl who never stopped paying attention. Her journal still rests in the drawer beside her bed. She told me she wants to keep writing in it, not about sad things anymore, but about trees, about her dreams, about what she's learning in school. She calls it her truth book. Every night when I tuck her in, I ask her the same question, a ritual carved into the fabric of our new life. "Do you feel safe?" And every night without fail, she answers with a soft, sure smile. "With you, yes." That's what I fought for. Not revenge, not victory, just that answer. And it is enough. It is everything. And I will fight for it for her every day of my life. If you've made it this far, if this story reached you even a little, I'd like to ask you something, not as a storyteller, but but as a fellow traveler through difficult truths. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Your words might be the hand someone else needs to hold. If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, you are not alone. And if you want more stories, real stories about strength, survival, and finding your voice in the quiet, subscribe to the channel. We're building something honest here. One story at a time. Thank you for listening.